The 1970s were supposed to belong to rebellion, loud guitars, and freedom without limits. But something unexpected happened. Faith slipped into the charts. Not quietly, not safely, but boldly.
On the first breath.
Songs about God, salvation, and belief started dominating radio stations across the world. Some comforted millions. Others sparked outrage and confusion. These were not just songs, they were statements that challenged culture itself. And as this countdown rises, the truth behind them becomes impossible to ignore. Number 15. Jesus Was a Capricorn by Kris Kristofferson.
If you can't find nobody else.
At first, this song does not sound religious at all. No choir, no grand worship, no sacred tone. Just a calm, almost casual voice telling a strange idea. But that idea changed everything. Kris Kristofferson brought Jesus into modern life, not as a distant figure, but as someone who could exist among ordinary people. That was the shock. Religion in music had always been treated with distance, respect from afar. But here it was being humanized, grounded, even linked with counterculture thinking. For some listeners, it felt honest and refreshing. For others, it felt uncomfortable. The song did not dominate charts like others on this list, but its impact was deeper. It questioned how faith should be presented. It blurred the line between sacred and everyday life. Because sometimes the most controversial idea is not rebellion. It is making something sacred feel real. Number 14. I Wish We'd All Been Ready by Larry Norman.
I wish we'd all.
This was not a gentle song. It did not comfort. It warned. Larry Norman stepped into a world dominated by rock music and brought something unexpected with him: fear. The song painted a picture of the end times, a moment where people are left behind because they were not ready. That message was not subtle. It was direct and unsettling. And that was exactly why it stood out. In the early 1970s, rock music was about freedom and expression, not accountability, not judgment. But Norman challenged that idea completely. He proved that faith could exist inside rock without compromise. It never became a mainstream chart giant, but its influence shaped an entire genre. Christian rock was born from songs like this.
She hears the noise.
Because sometimes impact is not measured in charts. It is measured in how many voices follow after. Number 13. Put Your Hand in the Hand by Ocean. There was no hiding in this song. No metaphor, no disguise, no ambiguity. It spoke directly about Jesus in a way pop radio rarely allowed at the time. That was the shock. In a decade where music pushed boundaries politically and socially, religion was usually kept private. But this song ignored that rule completely. It placed belief right in the center of mainstream culture.
When I read about the part where the...
And somehow, it worked. The song climbed charts across multiple countries. It became one of the most recognizable spiritual songs of the era. For many listeners, it was uplifting, a reminder of stability in a changing world. For others, it felt unexpected, almost out of place. But that tension is what made it powerful. It proved that faith did not need to hide behind symbolism to succeed. Because sometimes what surprises people most is not rebellion. It is conviction spoken out loud. Number 12. I Can See Clearly Now by Johnny Nash.
Can see clearly now the rain is gone.
At first, this feels like nothing more than a simple, uplifting song. Bright melody, easy rhythm, a voice filled with optimism. It sounds like relief after a storm. But beneath that simplicity, something deeper was hiding. Listeners in the 1970s began hearing more than just weather clearing. They heard transformation, a shift from darkness into light. And in music history, that kind of language has always carried spiritual weight. But what made this song powerful was its ambiguity. It never directly mentioned God. It never declared itself religious. Instead, it allowed listeners to project their own meaning onto it. For some, it became a story of personal struggle. For others, it became a quiet reflection of faith. That flexibility turned it into a global hit. It crossed boundaries without forcing belief. It invited interpretation instead of demanding it. Because sometimes, the strongest spiritual message is the one that never announces itself. Number 11. Jesus is Just All Right by the Doobie Brothers. This was a collision of worlds. Rock music and open faith rarely stood side by side in the early 1970s. But this song forced them together without hesitation. The message was simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. Jesus is just all right with me. No metaphor, no poetic disguise, just a clear declaration placed inside a rock groove. That is what made it stand out. Rock was supposed to challenge systems, not embrace them. Yet here was a band rooted in that culture, delivering something spiritual without apology. The song was not originally theirs. It had gospel roots. But the Doobie Brothers gave it a new identity. They transformed it into something accessible, something modern, something that could live on mainstream radio. For some listeners, it felt uplifting. For others, it was unexpected. But no one ignored it. Because sometimes what shocks the world is not the message itself, but where that message chooses to appear. Number 10. One Toke Over the Line by Brewer and Shipley.
If I should choose to make a part of me.
This song confused people from the very beginning. The title alone sparked controversy. Many assumed it was about excess, about crossing limits in a reckless way. And in some ways it was. But the deeper meaning told a different story. The idea of going home became central. Not a physical place, but a sense of peace. A return to something stable. That is where things became strange. A song rooted in counterculture suddenly started being interpreted as spiritual. It even appeared on a family-friendly television show where it was introduced as a modern gospel-style track. The irony was undeniable. A song walking the line between rebellion and reflection was embraced by audiences who saw it as something comforting. It became a major hit and reached a wide audience because of that dual identity. Because sometimes, the most powerful songs are the ones people do not fully understand, but feel anyway. Number 9. Give Me Love, Give Me Peace on Earth by George Harrison.
Heavy load trying to touch.
By the early 1970s, George Harrison was no longer just part of a legendary band. He had become something more personal, something searching. And this song revealed that shift in a way that felt almost exposed. Unlike his earlier work, this was not a grand spiritual declaration. It was quieter, a plea rather than a statement. Give me love, give me peace on earth. Simple words, but loaded with vulnerability. That vulnerability is what made it powerful. Instead of telling listeners what to believe, Harrison invited them into his own longing. At a time when the world was still dealing with conflict and unrest, that honesty resonated deeply. The song climbed to number 1 and became one of the defining spiritual pop tracks of the decade. But its real strength was emotional, not just commercial. Because sometimes the most radical message is not certainty. It is the courage to admit you are still searching. Number 8. The Lord's Prayer by Sister Janet Mead.
Our Father who art in heaven.
This should not have worked. A nun recording a literal prayer and placing it on mainstream radio sounded impossible. There was no adaptation, no metaphor, no attempt to modernize the message. And that was exactly why it shocked the world. The Lord's Prayer is one of the most sacred texts in Christianity. Yet here it was being broadcast as a pop song. For many listeners, it felt deeply moving. For others, it felt almost unreal. But the result could not be ignored. The song climbed the charts globally and sold millions of copies. Sister Janet Mead became the first Catholic nun to earn a gold record. What made it unforgettable was not just its success, but its refusal to compromise. It did not change itself to fit the industry. The industry adapted to it. Because sometimes what breaks through the noise is not reinvention. It is truth, delivered exactly as it is. Number 7. My Tribute to God Be the Glory by Andre Crouch.
How can I say thanks?
In a decade dominated by rock and disco, this song moved in a completely different direction. It did not try to compete with trends. It did not chase popularity. It focused on something simpler: gratitude. How can I say thanks for the things you have done for me? That line carried the entire weight of the song. No complexity, no hidden meaning, just sincerity. And that sincerity changed everything. The song crossed borders, cultures, and languages. It became a global staple in churches and beyond. Andraé Crouch did more than create a hit. He helped redefine gospel music. By blending traditional worship with modern sound, he opened the door for a new generation of artists. The song did not need controversy to succeed. It relied on emotional truth, because sometimes what reaches the world the deepest is not noise. It is honesty that feels impossible to ignore. Number 6, You Light Up My Life by Debbie Boone. At first, this feels like a love song. Soft, gentle, almost fragile in the way it moves. A voice filled with emotion singing about someone who brings light into darkness. That is how most people heard it. But that was not the full story. Debbie Boone always described the song differently. For her, it was not about romance. It was about faith. A connection to something higher, something unseen but deeply felt. That hidden meaning changed everything. Because while audiences embraced it as a love ballad, it quietly carried a spiritual core that made it resonate even deeper. The impact was undeniable. The song spent 10 consecutive weeks at number 1, setting a record at the time. It became one of the biggest hits of the entire decade. What made it powerful was its dual identity. It spoke to everyone in different ways without forcing a single interpretation. Because sometimes, the most successful message is the one that reaches people without them even realizing why. Number 5, Oh Happy Day by Edwin Hawkins Singers. This was not meant for the charts. It was not designed for radio. It belonged to churches, to communities, to moments of shared belief. And yet, it broke through everything. Oh Happy Day carried pure gospel energy into mainstream music without changing its message. There was no attempt to soften it, no effort to disguise its meaning. It was joyful, direct, and completely rooted in faith. That is what made its success extraordinary. The song climbed charts around the world and sold millions of copies, becoming one of the first gospel recordings to achieve massive commercial success. But more than numbers, it changed perception. It proved that gospel music did not need to stay confined. It could stand alongside pop and rock and still hold its identity. Because sometimes the most powerful force is not rebellion or controversy. It is joy that refuses to stay contained. Number 4, Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel.
When you're weary.
This song never calls itself religious. It never mentions God directly, and yet it feels like a hymn from the very first note. That feeling is not accidental. Inspired by gospel traditions, the song carries a message of support, sacrifice, and presence. I will lay me down. That line alone echoes something deeply spiritual, even without naming it. When it was released, it did more than succeed. It dominated. Multiple Grammy Awards, chart-topping success, and a lasting legacy that continues decades later. But what makes it truly powerful is its universality. It speaks to anyone in need of comfort, regardless of belief. At a time when the world felt uncertain, this song became something steady, something reliable. Because sometimes the most spiritual message is not the one that preaches. It is the one that simply promises to stay. Number 3, Morning Has Broken by Cat Stevens.
On the first breath.
At first, this song feels almost too gentle to matter. A soft piano, a calm voice, a melody that drifts quietly forward. Nothing about it feels shocking, but that is exactly what made it powerful. This was not a reinterpretation. It was a hymn, presented almost exactly as it was written. In a decade defined by rebellion and questioning tradition, Cat Stevens chose something different.
He chose sincerity without alteration. That decision stood out more than any controversy could. While others were pushing boundaries, this song returned to something pure, a direct expression of gratitude for life, creation, and renewal. The result was global success. It climbed charts across multiple countries and became one of the most recognizable songs of the decade. But its deeper impact came later. As Stevens moved further into his own spiritual journey, the song gained even more meaning. Because sometimes the boldest choice is not to change something. It is to believe in it exactly as it is.
Number 2, My Sweet Lord by George Harrison.
My sweet Lord.
This was more than a song. It was a spiritual declaration placed directly into mainstream culture without hesitation. At first it feels familiar, almost comforting. A simple melody, a repeated phrase that sounds like devotion, but then it shifts. Hallelujah becomes Hare Krishna. Western belief blends with Eastern spirituality. That moment changed everything. Mainstream audiences were suddenly hearing something completely outside their cultural framework. A fusion of faiths, a universal search for something greater than one tradition. The song became a global #1 and one of the defining tracks of the decade. But its influence went beyond charts. It opened a door for spiritual exploration in popular music. It also sparked controversy through a major copyright case. Yet even that could not overshadow its impact. Because sometimes the most powerful idea is not choosing one path. It is showing that all paths might be connected. Number 1, Spirit in the Sky by Norman Greenbaum. From the very first note, this song feels different. A gritty guitar, a raw energy, something that sounds closer to rock rebellion than anything spiritual. And then the lyrics begin. Suddenly, it is about Jesus, about death, about what happens after everything ends. Direct, unapologetic, and impossible to ignore. That contrast is what made it explode. A rock anthem built entirely around faith at a time when the two rarely existed together so openly. Even more surprising was the man behind it. Norman Greenbaum was not part of the faith he was singing about, and yet he created one of the most recognizable religious songs of the era. The song climbed charts worldwide and became a defining hit of the 1970s. Its sound was unforgettable, but its message was just as strong. Because sometimes what shocks the world is not just what is being said, it is who dares to say it. The 1970s proved something no one expected. Faith did not stay in churches. It moved into music, into culture, into everyday life. These songs did not just entertain, they challenged beliefs and connected millions across the world. Now the question is simple. Which one stayed with you the most, and which one still speaks today?